If I had to say that there was one thing that was truly exceptional about the Sabbath, it would have to be how well it works. The Sabbath does something, and what it does is remarkable. Imagine that there was a job called social architect, and you had it. Your job was dreaming up the perfect society, drafting the blueprint for it, overseeing its construction from scratch. Casting around for the existing social institutions to model your new society on, you'd happen upon the Sabbath. If a strong and powerfully interconnected communal life was high on your priority list, you'd quickly realize that you had stumbled on a very good way to achieve it, because the Sabbath can be re-described as a 4-step program for forging community spirit. Step 1, you'd write laws to limit work time. That's your pause, that's your rest. This would make room for all the other kinds of time that, you need in life. Rest time, recreational time, family time, time for friends and guests, and of course, time for God, if that happens to be something that you want in your life. Step 2, you would designate one particular day, one 24-hour period, as everybody's day off. This is the really important step. That would coordinate schedules so that people across a wide range of occupations and social spheres would all have to stop working at the same time and would be forced to turn toward one another and forge a different kind of bond. Step 3, you'd order that the day off be taken every single week rather than now and again, so that not working at that time would become a regular habit. Once the weekly rhythm of work and rest had become ingrained, it would set your community apart from other communities. It would establish clear boundaries between your society and everyone else's society, and boundaries, as everyone knows, are wonderful tools for ensuring the cohesiveness of a group. And step 4, you would make the day festive, filled with song, wine, food, and pretty clothes. People would come to look forward to the day as a treat, rather than experiencing all the other rules that go along with it as a burden. So that's the way the Sabbath works, and that is what it does. All ideas about God and commandedness and morality aside, the Sabbath is a machine, a technology for building community. It took me a lot longer to begin to hear a deeper resonance in the Sabbath, a political resonance. And here we sort of get to the Washington part of my talk. The fundamental idea of the Sabbath is so simple, so completely obvious, and yet so radical that it is practically invisible. But is right there in the 4th commandment. 6 days, I'm reading from the King James translation, which I like better than the JPS, so don't mind me. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. But the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle. It took me even longer to realize that there was yet another political lesson lurking in the 4th commandment. It took me a long time to figure this one out, because what I'm about to talk about goes very much against the grain, the American grain. And the notion is this, that not only does everyone have the right not to work every now and again, society has the right to organize itself collectively to make that possible. Societies have the right to manage their time, which means disposing of the time of the individuals in its midst. They can make laws of time that say this day can be a day of work and this day cannot. Now, perhaps this seems like a very authoritarian notion when it emanates from a monarchical state run in part by a priestly caste. But when you extract the idea from that context and put it in the hands of a democratic society, it seems like a pretty extraordinary tool. Now, I don't mean to make it sound like we in America don't have laws of time. We do. But the kind of laws of time that you need to get you to a Sabbath make us pretty nervous. To explain this, I'm going to quote from a Harvard law professor named Todd Rakoff. So excuse me if I start bandying some legal jargon around. But Rakoff asks us to imagine a world divided between 2 kinds of time regimes, a freedom of time regime and a constructed time regime. So in a freedom of time regime, people dispose of their time as they see fit. And the law does nothing more than lay down and enforce the conditions under which individuals and institutions get to swap time for money. I may work for you for as many hours a week as you will pay me for, and at whatever time we both agree on. And only if one of us breaks his side of the bargain does anyone go to court. In a constructed time regime, the law sets aside a certain period of time as social time and says, we valorize that time above and beyond your time. And it says that time may not be work time. You cannot use it in your freedom of time regime. When Rakoff goes hunting for an example of a real constructed time regime, he pretty much the only real one he can come up with is, in fact, the Sabbath. As exemplified by America's mostly defunct blue or Sunday closing laws, as he puts it, 6/7 commercial time and 1/7 non-commercial family, religious, or social time. So the Sabbath is like that nonprofit. It's adding value. So am I arguing that we should make joining the nonprofit of the Sabbath the law of the land? I'm not sure. But it's worth thinking about the fact that Sunday closing laws were the law of the land and the norm as little as 50 years ago, in 1961. There was a case called McGowan versus Maryland, and in it the Supreme Court upheld Sunday closing laws against the charge that they violated the First Amendment. Earl Warren wrote the opinion, but Justice Felix Frankfurter wrote a concurring opinion, and it's very brilliant, and one of the best defenses of the Sabbath ever written, in which he deemed the harm done by the shuttering of businesses and factories on Sunday. And here he was thinking specifically about the effect of blue laws on enterprises run by Jews and Seventh-day Adventists. So he said the harm done by the shuttering of these factories was trivial compared to the need to preserve a cultural asset of importance. That's his quote, a cultural asset of importance. Sunday, he said, has become a secular good, even if it comes from a religious institution. It is necessary to American well-being. It provides a required release from the daily grind, a preserve of mental peace, an opportunity for self-disposition. So am I asking for a return to blue laws? I'm going to actually switch to reading a little passage from the book, and then, we'll talk about blue laws if you want to, or Shabbos if you prefer. What might neo-Sabbatarian laws that protect coordinated rhythmic social time, look like? We have dedicated so few brain cells to the problem during the past half-century that it's hard to imagine a solution. Who knows what a team of crack labor policy wonks might come up with. But if we do make the collective decision that this kind of time is worth protecting, two things should become apparent. One, that the market will not do it for us, and two, that we have more tools at our disposal than simple legal prescriptions. We should start by tackling overwork. We could adopt European vacation policies, a minimum of 4 weeks, shorter work weeks, paid parental leave, and limits on overtime. We could emulate Germany and the Netherlands and give workers the right to reduce their hours and their pay unless companies can prove that this would constitute a hardship. But while these labor-friendly reforms would help Americans balance work and family life and might even generate jobs in this era of underemployment, they don't address the central problem of coordinating social time. It would be impossible and probably undesirable to forbid people to work at night or on weekends. But we could create a web of incentives and disincentives that might make it easier on those who do, and also remedy the harm done to society. We could tax off-hours labor and use the money to bolster the civic institutions weakened by the diminution of the pool of available volunteers. We could mandate higher pay or graduated bonuses for protracted or irregular schedules that reflect the hidden social and personal costs of staggered hours. We could strengthen a worker's right to refuse overtime or a job reassignment that entailed working non-standard hours. Each of these measures might have negative and unforeseen consequences, and we should instruct our labor policy wonks, that would be you, to model all possible outcomes. And we should concede that a full day of rest in the global era is probably a fantasy. But the idea does have a certain uplifting quality to it. Who thinks in terms of preserving public culture anymore? Everybody talks about popular culture, but pop culture is a creature of segmented markets, not common ones. But Sunday, and here I'm arguing for return to Sunday, which we can talk about, once gave Americans an experience that was national in scope, personal in character, and religiously neutral. As soon as religion was disestablished, no one had to go to church, or anywhere else for that matter. As for the common day of rest falling on Sunday, Frankfurter, who was Jewish, in McGowan versus Maryland, pointed out that to share a day of rest, you had to pick one. And it might as well be the one that most people already observed. The secular Sunday was a national holiday. One day a week, it was worth remembering, it is worth remembering, the country honored life beyond duty and the imperatives of the marketplace. For 24 hours, we stayed home and ate huge family dinners or went to church or set off on afternoon drives. And we not only did these things with members of our inner circle, we did them with the knowledge that everyone else was doing them too. That gave us permission not to work, along with the rest of the nation. We had fewer choices of what to do, but that lack of choice in retrospect was liberating because our inexhaustible options trail behind them the realization that we're not doing everything we could be doing. We embraced laziness, goofiness, random reading, desultory conversation, neighbors and relatives, both pleasant and unpleasant, the kinds of things that knit us together even as they made us more ourselves. So now, if you want to ask me any questions about blue laws or the Sabbath, I would love to take them.